being 6 weeks out, means we now have a pretty good idea of what the campaigns are going to look like for this election, the sort of character of how each side is going to run their candidate for the presidency. So we know, for example, that Republicans are going to keep trying to win the election this year by gaming the system, by trying to change the administration of the election, trying to change how the votes are cast and counted. Today, the pro-Trump majority on the Georgia State Election Board met again and pushed through yet more changes in that crucial swing state, even after they were just warned by the state's Republican Attorney General's office, the state's Republican Secretary of State's office last week. They were just warned that they're doing things they're really not allowed to do. But nevertheless, today they announced more. Today they announced they're going to investigate 8 different counties in Georgia for having rejected mass Republican challenges to individual voter registrations, voter challenges aimed at taking voters off the rolls. The state election board, with its pro-Trump majority, is now going to investigate counties that didn't do enough to throw voters off the rolls. They also today announced a whole new plan, 6 weeks out from the election, to mandate that photos of every ballot should be put online immediately following the election. We're 6 weeks out, and people are already, the ballots have already gone out, and this is yet another new rule they want. Local officials, and again, statewide officials like the AG and the Secretary of State, have said now on the record that what the state election board in Georgia is doing is crazy. The word used by the Secretary of State's office was absurdity. But hey, they're going for it. If maximum chaos is what they want in that critical swing state, apparently maximum chaos is what they are determined to get. So we've got eyes on the sort of rolling disaster in Georgia. We're also keeping eyes on Nebraska, where Republicans in the Trump campaign are trying to make a last-minute change to the rules in Nebraska that have been in place for more than 30 years. Republicans are apparently afraid that Kamala Harris may win one electoral vote from a congressional district in Omaha, which is the state's biggest city. So they are now at the very last second trying to change the rules in the state of Nebraska to block her from being able to win that single electoral vote. Republican U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, you might have seen, has been in Nebraska trying to talk Republicans there into doing it. Today, a single Republican state senator said that he was not going to go along with this plan, that it didn't seem right or fair to him to do it this way, especially at the last minute. The reason I say we are watching Nebraska in the wake of that news today is because, naturally, once this one Republican state senator came out and said he wasn't going to go along with it, thus apparently scuttling the Republicans' plans to make this last-minute change, Donald Trump himself is now singling out that one individual Republican state senator, singling him out by name, attacking him online, blaming him, putting pressure on him, which is exactly the kind of tactics Trump brought to bear in 2020 when he singled out individual local Republican officials in places like Michigan and Arizona and Georgia and Pennsylvania and all of these swing states, telling them essentially to do his bidding or else, or face the consequences. That kind of name and shame intimidation from Trump alone and from the legions of his followers who take what they think is the appropriate action on command when he singles out someone by name for them to target. That is a rerun from what we saw from Trump in 2020, which did not ultimately work to throw out the election results in 2020, but it did ruin the lives of a whole lot of low-level officials and state officials who he targeted by name to try to bend them to his will. Right? It transformed their lives. It transformed the lives of their family members, and all in very bad ways. But that's how Trump politics works. That's how he operates. And if we have learned anything as a country from seeing previous iterations of his intimidation tactics brought to bear on low-level, obscure, or state-level officials, if we've learned anything from seeing this happen before, we should have learned that the way you stop his intimidation tactics from working is by opposing them, by recognizing when that's what he's doing, and by overtly standing up for these people when they are attacked, making sure that the only people who get in trouble in a Trump-initiated confrontation like this are the people who make the threats, the people who try to intimidate and coerce public officials into doing what they otherwise would not do. When Trump singles out individual, particularly Republicans, but individual local, municipal, county, state officials like that to get them to do what he wants around the election, we know, yes, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, to get them to bend to his will, but we know that it also ruins their lives. We've seen this over and over and over again, and that is why the intimidation tactics that he uses work, because it makes people afraid. The way for us as a country to stop that is to stand up for people who are targeted in this way and make sure that anybody threatening or trying to coerce them gets busted for it. We did not do enough of that in 2020. We have to do it in 2024 as part of defending our democracy. The Washington Post this weekend front paged a story about what they called the, quote, turbulent phase that Trump's campaign has entered into for this last 6 weeks of the campaign. They described Trump's behavior in the campaign right now as, quote, impulsive and impetuous. The Post noted in its story, quote, in a single 24-hour span at the end of last month, for example, Trump amplified a crude joke about Vice President Harris performing a sex act. He falsely accused her of staging a coup against President Biden. He promoted tributes to the QAnon conspiracy theory. He hawked digital trading cards. He became embroiled in a public feud with staff and officials at Arlington National Cemetery, all in 24 hours. And that is true. The Post goes on to describe gently, I think, what they call Trump's, quote, policy incoherence at this point in his campaign as well. And to be clear, along with the sort of just erratic behavior and outrageous behavior, the policy coherence really is off the charts, right? I mean, there's inexplicably high levels of interest and appetite in the mainstream press for reporting on Kamala Harris and Donald Trump as if they are similar kinds of cats, right? As if they are normal competing candidates that we can assess using the same kind of terms. But they're not the same kind of cats, right? They are not the same kind of candidates. They are not doing the same kinds of things. For example, like here's Kamala Harris getting the endorsement of 700 retired military and national security officials, while here's Trump promising that if he's president, he's going to find where California is hiding its huge secret faucet that they use to dump all the rainwater into the ocean. And if he's president, he's going to find the handle on the gigantic faucet and turn it the other way. It takes a whole day to turn the handle, he says. So problem solved. Everybody will have all the water that they want. Okay, well, here's Kamala Harris promising a child tax credit and saying how she'd pay for it. Here, on the other hand, is Donald Trump saying he's going to abolish the Department of the Interior for some reason. Nobody even bothered asking him why. Why do you want to abolish the Department of the Interior? Here's Trump saying he wants to take away the broadcast licenses of news organizations that criticize him. Here's Trump saying he wants to put former President Barack Obama in front of a military tribunal. But Harris does want a child tax credit. Yet one of these things is not like the other. I mean, even if you go to the less outrageous stuff, I mean, Republicans in the House of Representatives just ignored Trump's demand to shut down the government before the election. They are going ahead with funding the government against his wishes. They are not going to bring about a government shutdown, even though he demanded one. That insult and rebuke to the Republican Party's leader would have led the news for days if this was a candidate who attracted normal political coverage. But instead, while Trump instead races toward Election Day, rolling out a new scam, some new money-making effort to squeeze money out of his fans almost every day. I mean, this alone is completely bizarre. Imagine Kamala Harris doing anything like this. But every day, there's the new Trump commemorative coin that he is selling to his supporters. This comes hot on the heels of Trump's new cryptocurrency venture, which he has rolled out with the help of a man who literally calls himself, quote, the dirtbag of the internet, and another man who is a self-proclaimed pickup artist. Here's the candidate's wife launching her own book this week, hot on the heels of the news that the majority of her campaign appearances this whole election cycle were ones for which she was personally paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's his daughter-in-law, who he installed as the chair of the National Republican Party, nevertheless finding time in the home stretch of the campaign to drop a new single for her side hustle where she's a singer. None of these things, from the commemorative coin to the single, none of these things are raising money for the Trump campaign or the Republican Party. They're all just personal money-making gigs for him and his family that they are launching at the height of the campaign. Imagine if Kamala Harris was like rolling out a mortgage scam and some commemorative trinkets right now. Not for the campaign, but just to like get her and Doug some money. Trump, brought a 9/11 truther to the 9/11 commemoration on 9/11. And his staff really did shove an Arlington cemetery worker when she tried to stop them filming thumbs up, big grin campaign videos at grave sites. And no, apparently he's not got any sort of problem with the North Carolina Republican candidate for governor, who he endorsed and who he has celebrated as a candidate. No problem at all. Not even after the reporting that the man literally calls himself a Nazi, praises Hitler, praises Mein Kampf, wants to take away women's right to vote, and wants to bring back slavery because, according to him, slavery was good. Imagine being a world leader from some other country, coming to New York for the United Nations this week, coming to the United States of America, fully briefed and cognizant that a presidential nominee in this country, in that situation, who can't even criticize or distance himself from a candidate who has said those things, a presidential nominee of one of the major parties has got essentially even odds right now of being elected president of the United States, president of the United States of America.